project goes low level as Rust? I'm not sure. I do web development by day. I don't have a whole lot of experience with data science, almost none. My feeling is that mostly when you're doing data science, you're using quite like you're sort of offloading most of the work to like libraries, right? So I don't quite know if that ecosystem is there in Rust. So you might I don't think that there is like a NumPy or a Pandas for Rust. I might be wrong. I'm not sure. I think that over time, as the sort of machine learning data science space evolves in Rust, I think Rust would be a great fit for data science. But I don't know if it is today. I still recommend you check out Rust and just build like small toy projects in it. It's a fun language to learn, but specifically for data science, I'm not sure. All right, so if you want to be able to call response body on JSON, but it doesn't exist, we can add it. We can just make a trait for it. So we need to implement it for this guy. So basically what we want is we want a trait called body JSON, doesn't really matter, and we need an async function, which is kind of unfortunate. Fn body JSON. The signature is going to be similar to the body string. I believe is this one. So we're gonna have to go back to asyncs very soon. What is the result type? It's an IO error. So what I'm thinking is that we want something that can decode into any T where T implements deserialize, where deserialize is Saturday. Deserialize owned. That in here. Right. That means that we might get a deserialization error. I think this type will work. All right. So this function basically means so for those who haven't worked a whole lot with Saturday, so Saturday is the default, basically, serialization and deserialization library that we use. Can you go to create definitions through Vim? Yes, I use Rust Analyzer, which is a language server protocol server implementation for Rust. And then I use Vim LSP to basically talk to Rust Analyzer. And it can go to definition, it can like look up types and do all that kind of cool stuff. I'm very happy with Rust Analyzer. There's a link down below in the Twitch description info box kind of thing to my configuration files, and you can find my Vim config there. So to deserialize stuff in Saturday, there's two main sort of traits that you deal with as a user. There's deserialize and there's deserialize owned. So deserialize basically allows you to deserialize data without copying anything. So this means that the lifetime here is sort of the lifetime of the data that you're parsing, I believe. So you can imagine if you have like some JSON just as a string, and you want to convert that into like your own type, then you could have capital S strings. So you could have like data, and maybe it has like a key, and that's just some string. If Sere were to deserialize that, it would have to copy the string out of the JSON, right? Whereas if you were to do that, then you could still keep the original data around and basically do the deserialization without any copying. But in our case, since we're in tests, we don't really care about copying and all this ownership stuff, so we can just use deserialize owned, which will basically do the deserialization, but also clone it so we get ownership of it. So that's why we need deserialize owned, and the type that we need to return is obviously a T. And you can imagine that this body JSON function is going to do pretty much this on the inside. So its signature needs to look like body string. Like if body string takes self by value, then body JSON needs to do the same thing, because body JSON has to call body string. And if we look at the signature again of body string, you can see that it returns a result where the result is an stdio result, and that's just a specialization of result with the IO error type. So that means that in case it can't actually read from the like network socket or whatever to get the response. In our case, there's two errors that can actually go wrong. We can get this IO error from body string, or we can get a parsing error if we can't actually parse the response into whatever type T is, right? So we have to be able to basically return two errors. We could use something like anyhow, but since this is a test, we don't really care about the specific error type. If something goes wrong, we just want to panic. That's fine for tests. So in this case, we can just use like a dynamic error, basically. So this just says anything that implements the error trait is good to go. So I think we should be able to implement this now for response. But we're going to run into one issue, and that is the fact that body string is async. So you can imagine this is what we would like to write, right? Something like this. This needs to be a self. But we can only call a wait inside of async functions. So if we try to make this guy an async, the compiler is going to yell at us and say that here, async is not available. Functions and traits cannot be declared as async. And why exactly that is quite complicated. But for now, that's basically not a feature that Rust supports. Nico, one of the core developers of Rust, did write a blog post some months ago about why that is. The TLDR is that it's hard. So let's just dig up my .dot files. There we go. There is a trait called async trait that basically adds this feature. This is made by the same guy that makes anyhow and this era and Serde and a whole bunch of other crates. And that basically, you put this annotation on your trait, and now you can basically magically use async on your traits. The way that works is, if we actually go back to the endpoint from earlier, it converts all your function to return something like this. So a pin box din future. So this basically means that it's a future that's allocated on the heap rather than allocated on the stack. So this is very similar to how we're using the din era thing. So it's basically anything that implements the future trait can be returned, and it allocates. So it is, I guess there is more performance overhead with that than a regular async function, but it's the best we can do so far. So I'm wondering if we are already depending on async trait. No. Let's just write out the whole signature ourselves. That might also make it more like clear what async trait actually does. So you have to return a, let's just comment this out for now. You have to return a pin of a box of a din future where the output is this guy, right? So this is quite a crazy type that you're dealing with here. Like that. Just import a pin. If you're wondering sort of what pin is and what all this stuff actually means, John Genset, or John Hu on Twitter, has made a series of streams where he talks about how async actually works and how pinning actually works and all that stuff. I don't know a whole lot about it myself, so I'm not going to go into that today. My understanding goes as far as this is what you have to write to make an async trait today. So the way to actually make that work is you say box pin async move. And now we should be able to do this stuff inside. There we go. So this actually works. Now we sort of have async trait functions, right? So all that async trait basically does is convert all your async trait functions into something like this, and all the implementations into something like this. So I think if we look in the standard library, we should see box pin. Yeah, it's a shame they don't show an example of actually using it with a future, which is probably the most common way that you would be using this method. But anyway, so now we should be able to do this when we make this trait public. There we go. Is that also what the error message said? It is. Perhaps you need to implement it. We actually already do. We just need to make it public. All right. So our test should still work. And it should also be able to fail. Cool. What else do we need to look at? Let's remove some of these unused imports. HTTP service response. I'm wondering if we should make like some helper function to actually do at least this stuff, right? It's kind of annoying that we have to do all that each time. You could imagine that, I believe in Rocket you have something like request build get URL / something send server, like that. That would be significantly easier to deal with, right? Are you Dutch? No, I'm Danish. Yeah, I think So the reason that I'm spending so much on like test infrastructure is that we're going to do a lot of it. And basically, I want to make testing easy such that we never get the feeling that we don't want to test something because testing is inconvenient. Our goal should be to make testing so convenient that it's basically a no-brainer that we want to do it. And also like things that we do a lot, stuff like parsing JSON and building requests, those should be very easy. So I believe that it is actually worthwhile to spend time making it easy. So let's do that. So currently simulate is defined on the test backend. Like these two lines are a bit weird. We have to do that, right? Let's just make an async function called setup. Server. What type is this? And basically, I want to make a function that just does this. I just need to know exactly what the return type is going to be. And you can't directly see it from the test backend because it's generic over one type. So I basically want to know like what is this type. So if we say it's unit, it's definitely not unit. So the Rust compiler is just going to complain and say it's actually this type. So then I can just copy it. Stick it here. We should be able to do this. Move these absolute paths. Server is not found. Cannot find state. There we go. Make it public. Wait. Should we call it test server? This is really nice that you can like rename variables with Rust Analyzer. Having worked in like Ruby for years, which doesn't have a compiler or a static type system or any knowledge of what's going to happen at runtime, basically, being able to inspect types and do save refactors and renames and stuff like that is really cool. Private type state and public interface, because that needs to be public, I guess. Like that is a bit nicer. Let's try to get this interface working. So on request, we want a build method that returns some sort of builder, right? This is a thing they already have. That wouldn't surprise me. Where is request defined? It's defined in HTTP types down here. Request. Is there a builder? Nope. Oh well. There's a cookie builder. All right, so I guess we do have to make our own. It's not too bad. Request. So we're going to do basically the exact same thing we did before, make a trait that has the method that we need, and then implement that for, in our case, for request rather than response. So we need a fn build, it just returns a request builder. Implemented. There we go. Then I want to be able to call get. That'll basically set the HTTP method. What's it called? All right. So the idea is that we're basically going to have optional fields for each value that you can set on the request builder. So we should probably also have a method called post. Maybe also patch. Delete. I think these are all the ones that we're going to need. For completeness, let's just do put as well. I don't know if we're ever going to be using it. And then in the end, when we actually do send is just going to accept the server, and then it's going to just run this code and basically call unwrap on each of the fields and just panic if the field is missing. You wouldn't want that in a production library, of course, but for testing code, it's totally fine. So URL is going to be slash. That means we need a URL. We can actually cheat and just say derive default. And just say the default one. That means that when we add more fields here, we don't need to update this definition up here. And default, for those of you who haven't seen it, is a pretty neat trait in the standard library that just sort of defines how to create things that have a reasonable default. So it just defines like one function that doesn't take any arguments and just returns self. So in our case, it just sets each of the values to none, which is exactly what we want. So that's convenient. We need a URL method. Takes a string. And it's just going to set it. Like that. And then we need a send that takes a server. And the server is one of these, the test backend, because it's what comes out of this function up here. Oops, it goes there. It's going to do this. I think leaving the unwrap here is fine. Otherwise, we would have to type unwrap here in every single one of our tests, which is kind of annoying. I guess if we want eventually to change that, we can always change it when we get there. What does it return? It returns a response. Can't borrow server is mutable. And we probably want server to not be taken by a value, but instead as a mutable reference. Otherwise, we can't like use the server twice, which we're definitely going to want to do in tests to actually make more than one request. That would be annoying if we could do that. Let's pull the URL out. And format in this actual URL that we got up here. Like that. I think like this, right? That gives us a response. Run the tests. Yeah, and we hard-coded a failure here. All right, it seems things are actually working. And we did see that they can fail, which is of course important, that our test can also fail. So this is nice. I think our testing setup is basically in place now. Method and URL we're not using. It's a bit annoying that we're getting these like unused code warnings down here, so we're just gonna allow those. Allow dead code. Should make them go away. Anything else that we want in our builder? Probably a body, right? Let's deal with actually we're gonna like post request and patch and put. We're gonna want request bodies, which are probably gonna be like query, like forms or JSON or something like that. I'm not quite sure how that is going to work, if it's going to be form data or JSON. Let's just deal with that when we actually have to make our first request to create a user or something like that. I think for now we're actually good to actually start writing our first test and create some database tables. Any questions on what we've done so far? Any of the testing setup, anything? I do want to move these imports into here. Request. So what I'm basically doing is re-exporting common library types and functions that we're going to use in most of our tests. Like this request builder thing, we're going to use basically all the time. Same goes for the JSON comparison stuff. Nice. I think it's actually time to think about the database setup. At least the first couple of tables. Perhaps think about authentication, authorization as well. Yeah, I think we should start with that. I have to sneeze. All right. Let's commit this. Let's not commit the .env file, however. One thing we do probably want is separate test and like local development database. We want to like run the server locally versus running the tests locally. We do probably want separate separate like databases for that. So let's do that. Let's say in the .env file we want a test as well. Create DB, and then here we want a different database pool in test and development. That's actually pretty straightforward. If we make a function called make DB pool, returns a PG pool. I can pull those in there. Oops. Like that. And then we can just say this one is only CFG not test. And this one is CFG test. So basically the functions have the same name, but this one is only compiled if we're not in test mode, whereas this one is compiled if we are in test mode. One thing that I would like to get set up at some point, I don't think we need to do that now, is to automatically wrap each test in a transaction somehow, such that like the state from each test doesn't bleed into the next test. This is a bit annoying with how the connection pool is set up, because currently it has one connection pool is made, like we don't really have any way to access the connection pool from here to actually open a transaction. And also I wonder if you open a transaction on a connection and you then return that connection to the pool, would that, because down here in the actual SQL execution code, we don't deal with single transactions, right? We just pass the pool directly to fetch one, and that's how we load stuff from the database. And then fetch one will asynchronously get a pool from the connection, or get a connection from the pool rather. So if like in the beginning of a test we pull out, if you can imagine that we had a connection pool with only one connection in it, and we pull that connection out and we start a transaction on it and return it to the pool, does that then keep the transaction around? I am not sure. I guess we're gonna have to create a table to actually find out. What do you think, chat? I think this is something that we need to deal with early on. Otherwise, like, we cannot have tests written where they share state in the database, basically. That's not going to work. So let's make a table, just like a random user table, allowing you to create a user just with a username, just so we can actually put data into the database. And then we can try to deal with it and have like one test that creates a user and like another test that asserts that the database is empty. And then we can see if we can figure it out. So how do we actually make post endpoints? Or rather, I suppose we need some script to create the database. We could use migrations, which we probably should set up at some point. Diesel does have, Diesel, which is a database library for Rust, it does have a CLI that lets you create and run migrations. And it actually doesn't depend on Diesel itself, it's just a CLI that you run. So we could use that to have migrations running. I think for now, we just need like one SQL script that we can run that will like nuke all the tables and recreate them from scratch. And then when we have sort of a bigger setup and we're perhaps looking to deploy it to Heroku or AWS or something, then we can look into actually setting up migrations. Those two things shouldn't be mutually exclusive. So let's just say that we have a, let's actually have a bin setup script. And it's going to create the development database and the test database. Don't care about failures. That's what this or true business means. And then it is going to PSQL bin setup.sql. There we go. Create the users table. With an ID, username, is there dropDB? So now I should be able to do did that not work? Yeah, there we go. I wonder what database it created them on just before. Is there like a default database in PSQL? I'm not sure. So for those of you who don't know, when you install Postgres, it comes with some command line tools to basically create and delete databases. Those are just dropDB and createDB. And then PSQL is the tool that you actually use to open the Postgres REPL where you can run SQL. And you can say, if you pass say .-d, that it'll like act on that particular database, right? And if you do this syntax, that basically means that it'll run whatever the contents of this script is on that database. It's as if you like opened the REPL and typed out the contents of that file. So I imagine that we're going to be like adding, eventually we're going to be adding like a tweets table or something like that here. But for now we just have users. And so the reason that we're sort of dropping the database first and then recreating it is that it's just an easy way for us to, like, while we're nailing down the schema and figuring out and seeing what we need and stuff like that, then this is an easy way to just sort of get back to a clean slate. So I think, let's just test and see if this actually works. So we should be able to say select count star from users. That does actually work. So if you say just user X, it complains that that table doesn't exist. So SQLX is successfully talking to the database at compile time. So let's have an endpoint for now that just lists all the users. In fact, let's do it the TDD way and have a test for it first. Creating a user. So at first, there should be no users. So if we say get /users, I'm not sure that /users is an endpoint that we actually want in the finished application. Probably not. I mean, if we're going to have a million gazillion users, it's probably not very efficient to load up all of them. But for testing and getting things set up, it's totally fine. So we expect to have no users at first, right? Then we can use assert JSON EQ. So the reason that we want to use EQ and not include, as we did before, is if we assert that our response sort of includes an empty array, then if the response is not an empty array, then it'll still pass, because the empty array is basically included in all arrays, if that makes sense. So this I do expect to pass, well, to fail, because we haven't actually implemented it yet. It received a not found. It expected a 200, so that's from the status code, this guy, which makes sense. So we say at /users, let's just put in a to do. I guess not. And then we need to actually query the user. So what you can do in SQLX is you can use their query as macro, which basically takes a SQL string and some struct that has fields where the names and types matches the select statement that you're doing. And then it'll automatically like set each of these fields for each response from your query. So I imagine that we need something like this. Currently, we're just putting everything in source main. When we have sort of a bigger idea of the different moving parts that we're going to have in our app, then we're going to split them out and move them into different modules. But for now, we're just going to put everything in source main. So we're going to have a user with an ID that is a UUID. We just need to import it. And a username, that was a string, right? Select ID, username from users. I believe it is fetch all. Like that. And then we return users. And we just need to derive serialize. And UUID cannot be serialized. Does it have a Saturday feature? Does. Interesting. So there's a crate called what features that basically lists the feature flags that are available for some other crate, but it doesn't list the Saturday feature that UUID supposedly, according to their docs, have. Which I suppose is a bug in what features. Maybe I'm misunderstanding something. Right, so now it actually compiles. So the feature does exist. It does seem to be a bug in what features. And we're able to return the users directly as JSON because they are now serializable. Run the test again. And it passes. Although you could argue, if you were like a TDD purist, that this test is actually doing too much. Right, you could make it pass just like this, or like that, right? Just always returning an empty array would also make it pass. I guess that's the correct way to go. So then we actually need to be able to create a user. I think I'm not sure that we're going to get to authentication and authorization and password hashing and all this stuff today. I think we should just be able to have an endpoint to create a user directly from a username, and then we can do with auth next time, because that's quite a big, at least a bigger topic. So let's say that we need a post request. So I'm wondering, the request that we're actually doing here, how do we set the post body on that one? So that is an HTTP types request. Header values, replace body, take body, replace body with another body without deinitializing either one. Body string gets the body from the request. I suppose set body, set the request body, anything that could be converted into a body. Can we do JSON from reader? Buff read, request response from string. What are they doing over here? This was the other library that we found that we basically copied most of the testing code from. Did they have one that actually did? They have query string, server, test JSON, JSON body. This constructs an actual HTTP client and an actual HTTP server. That's probably not what we want. Let's see if we can get this guy working. Set body. Right. So let's do this stuff directly for now. We will eventually be going through our own builder API. So post / users, URL parse. Method is a post. And then we have rec set body, set content type. So that does work. We're probably going to have to say set content type as well. MIME from MIME for header value. From stir. We did look at, I think it was this one, where we had the body JSON from before. How did it set the MIME type? Body string. Or was it on the response? Yeah, it was. So that calls MIME application JSON. Is that a thing we have access to? Nope. Oh well. Set body JSON. Can we call this directly? So it expected a MIME set content type on the request. And MIME implements it implements from stir, which means that we can say dot parse, right? Yeah. So the parse function, so you can call parse on a string in this case, so on a stir, and you can basically convert it into anything, like any f that implements from string, And from string is basically a parsing trait. So it takes a string and returns some type or an error of some kind. And so you're able to create, so MIME implements from stir. That means you can basically parse strings into MIME types. Curious though how it actually does it. Sure that it's ASCII to do fill in. I love this. So it basically doesn't do any parsing at all, right? As long as the stuff is ASCII, then we're fine. So I'm wondering if this works. It's going to complain that the endpoint doesn't exist, and then I want to like over here, I want to like define the route and actually pull out the data and just see that we can parse it into some struct that implemented deserialize, right? Say 201 created, run the test. It should fail saying that the route doesn't exist. It does method not allowed. Yeah, that's probably because we're implementing, we only have users get, we don't have users post. Do you add that down here? What does get return? Get returns the app. You say move. That seems to work. All right. So it expected that we returned 201 created, but we actually returned 200 OK. This should make the test pass. And there we go. So how do we actually parse the JSON out of this request? Let's look at the docs. HTTP tied request. Body JSON. That seems to be what we want. So we expect a struct that has a username that's a string. Whoa, I got vimmed. Let's call it create user, and it implements deserialize. Request body JSON as a create user that is async. We need to declare the request is mutable. This is probably a result type of some kind. Yeah, create user or IO error. Interesting. What if there's a deserialization error? Any IO error encountered while reading the body's immediate transition error. If the body cannot be interpreted as valid JSON for the target type T, an error is returned. All right. Okay, it maps the invalid data, which I guess makes sense. Whoa. I fucked up the window sizing. Sorry, guys. There we go. We should be back now. If there's part of the browser window that you can't see, just let me know. It looks good in OBS. All right. Where were we? So, yeah. Can we use question mark directly? here. It seems so. That's a create user. Let's just see that it gets parsed correctly. It totally seems like it does. Very nice. And if we say like it also has a password, then we should get some HTTP error. Here we go. It gets mapped to internal server error. That's unfortunate. Invalid data. It would be nice if it automatically mapped invalid data to whatever that would be, like some 400 error, right? Client error. Let's add a to do for that. All right, so this works. We don't actually have a test that the user got created. However, if we call the endpoint to get all the users again, now we should get back the user that we created before, right? Username Bob. So I do expect this test to fail. Failing down here, that it expected to get 1 user, but it got 0 users. And there we go. So it says that the array was empty, basically. Let's just turn this over to an inclusive test, because we don't care that the JSON values are exactly identical. They will be for the time being, but later down the road they might not be anymore. It should still fail with a similar error though, and it does. So we need to actually fetch the user from the database, and then down here we need to actually create the user, right? Yep. So here we say, what is it? Query insert into users ID username values like that. And it needs the 2 parameters. So that's a UUID. How do you make a new UUID? Clock sequence. SHA-1 based on some data. I think v4 is what we need, which also requires us to add it as a cargo feature. I believe I saw that in their README earlier. Yeah. New v4. Mutable borrow occurs here. Immutable borrow occurs here. So the issue here is that we're trying to create a mutable borrow to the request while we already have an immutable borrow alive. So up here we borrow the state from the request. If we look at state, you can see it takes ampersand self, so it's an immutable reference to self, and it returns an immutable reference to the state. So this state lives for as long as self lives, which is the request. So the lifetime of state is tied to the lifetime of self. So this guy is a immutable borrow from the request. And then down here, to actually get the body JSON out, we do a mutable borrow, because we need to actually read the bytes out of the socket, which is immutable, which is a thing that you can only do once, right? I suppose. So at this point, we have an immutable borrow. We take a mutable borrow, and then down here, like it was fine before, because Rust knows that this borrow is not used below, so it basically goes out of scope immediately, which then makes this mutable borrow fine. But now we're using the immutable borrow down here. So we're basically, at this point, we have both a mutable and an immutable borrow alive at the same time, which you cannot have according to the borrow checker. Hey, how's it going? We're also doing web development today, but this time in Tide rather than Warp. So far it's going good. We had some issues getting the tests working, but currently not everything's broken. I think what we can do here is clone the connection pool and then borrow it down there. I'm not sure if there is an easier way around it. Cloning the connection pool is cheap to do. I'm not sure if we can look at the specific implementation of it, but it basically has an arc inside it, so cloning it is very cheap. Yeah, it just does an arc clone, so that's not a huge issue. It is slightly unfortunate though that we have to do that. Would it be, let's look at requests, see what we have. Into body. Is that the right request type? Yeah. So the function that we're calling is body JSON. This guy. How do you like Tide? I like it. I feel like the API, at least sort of the non-test API, is easier to understand and wrap your head around than Warp. The reason that we're not using Warp is because the type errors get pretty nasty sometimes. We haven't run into any of that stuff with Tide yet. We had some issues figuring out how to actually test it, and you needed like several other HTTP related crates to actually write the test for it, which was sort of odd, but oh well. Yeah, the Warp type errors are pretty crazy. It reminds me of Diesel, which I've used quite a bit for SQL. I don't think there's a good way around it. I think I think we're just gonna have to clone the connection pool. If we were to do, what is the method? Acquire await. So this actually pulls out a connection rather than just passing in the pool directly. Then it works. I guess that's fine in this case. If we were to do multiple queries in here, I would like to, no. Bumping the reference count on an arc is totally fine. That's the performance overhead that we can live with. It's going to be IO bound regardless, so it doesn't really matter. I now expect the test to pass, actually. And it does. And just to be totally, we're returning, should we return the user that we just created? That would be kind of nice. Should definitely not just return an empty body. That's sort of odd, right? What's the error that we're getting? Main 13. Right. So this is the error that we actually wanted to get in the first place. So the issue here is that if we fire up PSQL on Wither test, you can see that there's actually one user in the database. So what we want is for a way to automatically clear, sort of truncate all the tables before and after each test, so that there's no state that basically carries between each test, because that is going to make us crazy. So what I've done in the past is I set the size of the connection pool in test mode to be 1. So there's always just one connection there. And then before any test runs, I just grab that one connection, start a transaction on it, and put the connection back in the pool, basically. And that would basically keep the transaction around, and it would never be committed. And then the connection pool would go away, and then the connection would go away, and then the transaction would just be rolled back, basically, or never committed. I'm not sure that we can do the same thing here. So the reason that the test is failing is that it expects that there are no users to begin with, right? So it's this guy that fails. It expects it's something that's empty, but it didn't. I did a different way where I used Diesel's migration to set up a DB for every test so they can run in parallel. That's actually pretty cool. So then you did you have the databases created beforehand? Or did you just come up with a random name for the database and that was the name that you used? How did you do that? Because you're right, with the approach that I described, you cannot have tests run in parallel. Parallel tests going to the same database is a bit problematic sometimes. You can get it to work, but I've experienced that it can be a bit flaky. let's just try the single the connection with a connection pool the size of 1 to just see if it works. I believe you can say pool builder. I gave it a prefix and then adds random text at the end. Yeah. We might actually try the same thing. That's kind of neat. Builder max size. One. Is the added benefit that if the test fails, the DB is in the state that it failed in. That's actually pretty neat. How did you, like, when did you delete the databases then? Did you just do that manually, or were they reused between test runs? Build, text the URL. DB to delete on success. Yeah. So the test still fails, which is good. We updated the wrong connection pool. Still want this to be new. So this is the non-test version. This is the test version. Right. I'm curious if it's gonna like just hang because it's never gonna be able to get a connection. So let's say up here we make the server and we're able to get the state from the server. Tied server with state. No, we're not. That means we have to pass the connection pool in. Should still fail the same way. Not present. It's because we need to set up the environment variables. Let's just do that here. And let's also do it here. Is it a problem if we do this more than once? This should be called early in the execution, and the global logger may only be initialized once. Future notification attempts will return an error. It's already been said. God damn it. Let's ignore logging and tests for now. We do need to call .env though to actually set up the database environment variable. And still panics in the same way, so that means that it should probably be getting the same connection. So now we should be able to say get a connection. DB pool acquire. And then I believe you can say begin. Yeah, it's not gonna work. I believe, so when you call begin on a connection, it returns a transaction, and transaction implements drop, and drop will most likely close the transaction. Yeah, so we won't be able to do the thing that I'm trying to do because the transaction will be immediately closed here. That kind of sucks. I suppose we do need multiple databases. How did I found another example that used warp. Rust real world app warp. How did they do their testing? Assuming they did. No, they did not. Real world tide. Do these people have tests? Domain. What is this? Create database. Oh, that's cool. You can create a database directly from SQL. Yeah, I think we might have to do something similar. It is almost a bit unfortunate that, like, if you don't care about the test database being left around if a test fails, is there a way to like easily remove it, or are you just gonna end up with a lot of test databases just laying around? Get test repo. Yeah, delete them occasionally. I honestly don't see another way to do it. Yeah. All right, let's try to port this to SQLX and see how that works. So we don't care about the size anymore. The DB doesn't drop because of the panic. Yeah. So we don't need to be passing in the connection pool anymore. We can just make it here. Let's do that initialization in main like we did before. Wait, we do need to pass in the connection pool still because we have to customize what URL is going to be using. So let's get rid of this guy. All right. Rand. We're not using tracing, at least not yet. Diesel connection establish. So you're doing that just to create the database. I wonder if there is in SQLX a way to just like create one one connection and not a pool. Connect. Totally seems like there is. This is going to be an async function. Let's just unwrap. So this is going to be PG connection, right? Connect DB URL, await unwrap. We need to import this trait and this guy. Parse DB URL. All right. I see. So the reason you're using format is because can you do like that for no? You can't do, what are they called? Like the Postgres placeholder. Like the interpolated values in SQL. Type annotations needed. Database. What databases are there? Postgres. Yeah, it's gonna be fine. Let's see. It's pretty cool that you can just like pull in code and you don't necessarily have to understand all of it. You just kind of fix the type errors one by one, and hopefully it'll just work at the end. So query dot, how do you execute a query? Query, your query dot execute. Execute with the connection. Come on. I'm not quite sure if this actually needs to be its own variable. Yes, it does. I wish that Rust could just like figure this out. Do you ever get these like creates a temporary variable that is immediately freed? Can't do that. And the solution is always just to pull it into a variable. That's annoying. Execute, unwrap. Used by test code. Extract variable to local. Which LSP plugin do you use for Vim? I use Vim LSP, I believe it's called. Yeah, Vim LSP, and it's broken. At least the fixes. So if, for example, we remove state down here, there's an action to add the import for it, but it fails. Yeah, COC. I have used COC before. Maybe I should give it a shot again. What does this do? It gets the process ID of the database. Drop DB. probably inline this. Yeah, I'm also super happy with Rust Analyzer. I think the issue is that my my LSP Vim plugin has a bug or something. I'm not quite sure what's going on. I use Scala by day, and the imports work fine there. So I'm not quite sure what's going on. Drop the database. Run migrations. This one we don't really have, so we need to figure out how to do that. Pub async. So currently we're not really dealing with migrations. We just have a single setup SQL file. Can you read the whole file and then run it in one go, or do you need to split it by semicolons? Let's find out. For me, it ran the whole thing, yeah. I'm hoping it's gonna do that. Let's be a good citizen and use the async read file. fs read to string. Yeah, would be convenient to put it in a crate. Test DB. DB, what is that? So that's the thing that you create in the test, and then that is what you implement drop on. I see. So it needs to be our PG pool, I believe. PG pool. Oh yeah, because it's an option, right? DB URL. Is it TPOP Vim commenter that you're using for your blog comments? Yes, it is. It is right there. I use that for lots of years. Too long. I think I have a lot of Timpo plugins. Yeah, quite a bit. That guy is a legend. Pool size. Let's call this DB pool. How did we actually create the pool? And the reason that you don't panic here is because panics in drops are hard, or is that a bad idea to panic during a drop? Drop DB takes the URL. That's a future. How do you invoke a future from drop? Just to block on? Spawn. So the problem is that dbURL is tied to the lifetime of self, and self goes out of scope. So if we make this one take a capital S string, so how do we actually call this? We say new on the test DB. And that gives us a DB. Like that. Can we have it like print the name of the database that it creates? Whoops. Everything seemed to just work. Database is still there though. Relation users do not exist. How do you list all tables in Postgres? DT. Oops. So if we don't do anything in drop, that should make the database stick around. If we just do drop DB. Because I'm curious if the future ever actually got to finish, because we just like spawn it and then the test finishes immediately, which probably drops the future, so it never gets to finish. So we probably want like futures block on or something to make sure that it actually gets time to finish. But I just actually want to see that it does create all the tables correctly. Let's run the test again. It failed. Relation users already exists. 197. Why does it already exist? Do we create it twice? The error is that the user table already exists. Relation users already exists. But if we open up the table, like if we open up the database and we list all the tables, it's not there. Do we create it? You don't run the migrations twice. Is there a way that you can see, like select all the query Postgres to get all the tables? To get a listing of every table being managed by Postgres for a particular database. basically like, I want to see what tables are actually there. Fetch all. That's quite a lot. Is there a way to only get to see just the tables in the information schema? For listing your tables. I guess that's what we want. Yeah, the user table is there. But why? Yeah, it does seem to be a different name each time. So this is N1L. And this is ICG. So it is a different name. Are you sure it's using the correct DP? Pretty sure. Can we log here? What if we do, can we log the PG connection? This seems right, right? It's using the same one each time, and it's not like pgcon 193. Yeah, it's just connecting to this URL, and I don't even know what it means when you just have a slash at the end and actually no database name. So it's not actually connecting to the database, to the correct database, you're right. I think it uses your users DB. What is my default user? Yeah. Yeah, that's it. That matches the table schema that we're trying to create, right? So why does this return a tuple? Because we need both. But when we're actually connecting, we want the whole thing, right? So really what we want is I was wondering if like we could make this one, the PG connection, include the name of the database, but I guess we don't want that because you can't, here when we're creating the database, you can't connect to it if it doesn't exist. So I assume it's only for actually running the schema where we want to like put the two names back together. If I can type like that. I think this does it. There's no other places where we're using the URL. So up here, it shouldn't matter, right? No, and in fact, we probably can't because we're dropping the database. Same goes here. That seems to work. I do believe we commented out our drop. So if we open up this database, there we go. That did actually work. Nice. Now we just need to bring the drop back. I believe in futures there is a block on. Use a local pool if you need fine-grained control. In the future, it's completion on the current thread. Yeah, sounds like exactly what we want. Can we avoid the clone now? Yep. Very nice. So that worked. I would now expect this database to be gone. And it is. Sweet. It's actually working. This is cool. So now we somehow need to get that hooked up and wired into this actual server stuff to make it a bit more automatic. But thanks, this is a really cool setup. I had honestly never, I've never done it this way before. I've done Rails development in the past. And there you have either two options. You have like every test gets one connection that's wrapped in a transaction. And in earlier versions of Rails, they're able to have multiple, like I think, however, like 4, 6, 8 something test databases that Rails will like manage for you and automatically put tests on different databases. But it was cool that you're basically able to build this in Rust. And the fact that we have drop is super convenient for cleaning this up. That's really nice. So we've been going for like 4 hours, and as you can see, it's past midnight in Copenhagen. So I think we're gonna cut the stream here. We made pretty good progress, I would say. Basically, we sort of, without knowing anything about how Tide worked, we were basically able to sort of wrap our head around it, add our first few routes, create a user. We're gonna have to do like password authentication and stuff like that in the next stream. We got testing set up. We still have a bit of infrastructure to make this a bit more manageable, but that should be fairly straightforward. So all in all, I think is a productive first stream. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in probably about a week. Yeah, take care. See ya.